Hi, I'm Lisa Turner. I'm an instructor at Bowman College of Holistic Nutrition and Culinary Arts. And today I'm in the kitchens at Silver Sage Co-Housing, and I'm going to show you how to make pickled butternut squash. This is a beautiful dish for your holiday table. It's very colorful and really very easy to do. So we're going to start off with a butternut squash. These things are not as horrible as they seem to be. They're actually pretty easy to handle once you know a couple of little tricks. So I'm going to start off, this is about a 2-pound squash, which is going to be just about right for your recipe. And I'll start off by cutting off the top and the bottom of the squash. And then you can see where the neck starts to move into a bulbous part. I'm going to cut it right here at the neck. And then it's going to be a lot easier to handle this thing. You can do this recipe with any kind of squash, but butternut squash is nice because it has a much thinner skin than other squash do. So once I've cut it in half, I'll cut each piece lengthwise again in half, and I'm just going to scoop the seeds out. And I'll put these in a bowl, and again you can compost these. These are not so good for roasting and eating like pumpkin seeds are. Now once I've done that, I've got some easy, more manageable pieces to start peeling. The best peeler to use is one of these U-shaped peelers, although you can use any kind of a good vegetable peeler. Some people like to use paring knives. I find it much easier to use these. And again, the skin, as you can see, is much thinner than it is on other kinds of squash, like acorn squash and pumpkin. If you are not able to find a smaller squash, say about a 2-pound squash, then you can always get a 3-pound squash and just use part of it for this recipe and cut the other part up and bake it. And for these ends are actually really easy to get the skins off of. They just zip right off with a peeler.
All right, I'm not going to do the whole thing today, but you will at home. And what we're going to do for cutting it, I'm going to cut this into a large dice or slightly smaller than bite size. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow the squash to absorb some of the brine. And there are a couple of different ways to cut this. You can cut this thing lengthwise first and then cut it into planks, but I find this the easiest way to do. So then what you'll have is a bunch of little squares. I'll put this into a colander. And you can see when you cut the squash open, this beautiful orange color. And that tells you that it's rich in beta-carotene, which is an antioxidant that helps to reduce the risk of cancer and heart disease. And you'll also find that in pumpkin, in mango, in papaya, any vegetable really that has that bright orange color.
And once we have all of our squash in here, I'm going to put it in a colander with a plate underneath it. You can also just do this in the sink and leave it in the sink to drink. What I'm going to do is give it a good shake of salt. You'll use about a tablespoon for 2-pound squash. And once you get the salt on using kosher salt, you can get it pretty much in the grocery store. You can also use coarse sea salt, which works really well. And then toss it around so you're really coating the squash. And then we're going to let this just sit for about 4 hours. You can let it sit a little bit longer if you have the time. And what this is going to do is the squash is going to help soften up the pieces of the butternut squash and make it more absorbable. So it's going to start to absorb the broth, which we'll make now. So I'm just going to take a medium pot And into this I'm going to put 1½ cups of apple cider vinegar. You can use any kind of vinegar. I'm using apple cider vinegar because I think it goes really well with the pumpkin and the squash flavors. And then I'm going to use apple juice. And then we're going to add the honey. I'm using about 1/2 cup of honey. I like using the raw unfiltered honey. Again, you can use sugar, you can use any kind of vinegar, but I feel like the apple cider vinegar and apple juice and honey is just a really nice combination with butternut squash. So I'll stir that to mix it really well. And then I'm going to put a handful of different kinds of spices. I'm using vanilla bean. And I'll use just a handful of cardamom pods. If you can find cardamom seed, they tend to be a little harder to find, but if you can find them, you can use cardamom seed as well. I'll put in 2 whole cinnamon sticks and 2 star anise pods. So these are sort of sweet, warming spices that go really well with any kind of a winter squash. Now I'm just going to let this simmer on about medium-high. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to go back to my squash. And so now we're coming back to the squash. This is what it's going to look like after it's been sitting for about 4 or 5 hours. And you can see the difference between the squash we just put in and this squash. It gets a lot brighter and oranger. It almost feels like it's cooking, but it's still tender. And because it's soft, it's going to allow it to absorb that brine flavor. I've already rinsed this. At home, what you're going to do is you're going to hold it under the sink and you're going to rinse it in cold running water and give it a few tosses with your hands so you make sure you get all of the salt off. And then you can just squeeze the water out with your hands. You can also wrap it in a linen towel. Don't use a towel with lint on it because then you'll have that in your squash. And then you just pack it into a jar. Now a quart jar is just about perfect for a slightly smaller than 2-pound squash. So once we get this all packed in, I'm going to bring this brine over. Now at home you'll let the brine simmer for at least 5 minutes, and what that does is that starts to take the flavors out of the spices, so the brine just gets infused with all those spice flavors. And then once it's sat for about 2 hours, you're going to put a lid on it and store it in the refrigerator for 24 hours. Once it's been in the refrigerator for about 24 hours, it really starts to taste good. You can serve it on your holiday table as a little side, and it will keep for about a month. That is how you make pickled butternut squash. I hope you enjoy it. Happy Thanksgiving.